Welcome back, everyone, to me reading my book to whether you're watching or listening. Reading my book, my little version of the audio book. It's a lot more complicated than just sitting in front of a microphone and then reading, because I just don't want to reach out to Audible and try to, I don't know, figure out like payment and how to do it and organization-wise. So shout out to Sean for letting me use his microphone setup, podcast setup again, warehouse, and then also Lauren for shooting all of this footage, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I can write, and that's about it. So I did take notes this time. So if you're listening strictly for the book, you might want to fast forward like 5 minutes, but I don't know. We'll see. Plan is to release every Friday, a couple chapters at a time, starting hopefully this Friday. But I've been very busy, so we'll see what happens. Be busy being mostly has to do with work. Shout out to my guy Ian for passing his test, and then everyone at my store, the Coil location at Triad, really just stepping it up, and weekends are always busy. But yeah, everybody's finally out of training, and now they're like officially part of the crew. So yeah, shout out to everyone. Today was supposed to be day 3 of 75 hard, but I failed already. So starting over tomorrow, don't you worry. All right, so basically we'll just get into like the chapter overview. The couple that we're going to read, usually I'll read like 2 at a time. It'll be Forbidden Owl and then Make the World Smaller for chapter 4. But those are supposed to be like clues to what the chapter's about, so I won't go into it too much. But I do have proper notes for the post-chapter review. So let's go ahead and get started with this first one. All right, so Forbidden Owl. So for the majority of my chapter titles, I have been trying to come up with some sort of goofy and or clever title to get a quick laugh or make people guess what the chapter will be about. Depending on your upbringing and current outlook on certain things in today's society, you may completely understand my attempt at humor, and this will come across as a top-tier dad joke, hopefully. Or you may not understand it at all, and instead just cringe at my failed attempt. Never know until you try, right? So never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. That is so cheesy. Who wrote this? This chapter will likely hit home for more of the guys who read it than the girls. Not that girls can't take anything from it, but as I elaborate further, you'll see what I mean. How many of you remember doing something totally awesome when you were a kid? First three-pointer you nailed, first home run in Little League, or acing your first times tables test under the allotted time limit. Feels good, right? And also kind of goofy to look back at. What about the time you did something incredibly embarrassing? So bad that your ears start burning and your face flushes bright red when you think back to the exact moment. Now, which one do you remember easier or quicker? Which one feels more recent, as if it happened yesterday or even last week? Of the 2 options, which one has more minute detail to it? I bet you it's the embarrassing one, right? Right. One of the most embarrassing moments during my childhood may seem a little silly to you, but I promise you it was no laughing matter at the time. For those of you who are more well-versed in terms of marketing realm, I'd like to ask you a moderately simple question. If you wanted to create a restaurant to attract a certain demographic, say your typical American male, teenage years and above, what would you place in said restaurant, and what type of food/services would be offered? What quote-unquote filter would you apply to the hiring process for your business? I'll just answer for you so you don't have to say it to yourself. And for the ones who are still lost, the answer is Hooters. For those of you, which I assume are not many, who do not know what Hooters is, it's a restaurant that has a television in just about every square foot of wall space that they can fit. Each TV shows a plethora of mainly things, like this week's big game, highlights of last night's matchup, or any mixture of the two. Maybe throw in a blockbuster movie with plenty of explosions and fast cars. And the food is essentially anything that's fried and can be dipped in any combo of ketchup, ranch, barbecue, or more, and especially wings. Everyone loves a good plate of wings, right? So far, it doesn't seem too shabby, right? The employees, however, are where things get a little interesting, especially for the younger guys like me at the time. There are no male servers whatsoever. None. Each female waitress dresses in minimal clothing, more than likely a one-size-too-small V-neck t-shirt and shorts that don't seem to go much further than quote-unquote absolutely necessary. Each one of them is more friendly, talkative, and certainly not at all hard to look at either. Now, before I continue, because I know how things may be misconstrued and how my words may be taken out of context, this is my life lesson and my way of processing through it. In no way, shape, or form am I making any attempt to shame or guilt anyone into any sort of thinking or opinion about anyone's career choices. Again, this is just my experience that I'm using to get a certain point across. So please just continue reading or watching/listening. Keep in mind, this is just the restaurant itself. It doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with this particular story, but we needed to lay out some foundational ideas first. Something that goes on once every calendar years or so is the Hooters swimsuit competition. I couldn't tell you a lot about it because I've only watched it once, which is where our lesson begins. I heard a few of my friends at school mention this Girls in Bikinis show on TV earlier in the week, but I hadn't heard of anything like that before, especially not on regular TV. Usually that kind of thing was on those extra channels that you had to pay a whole bunch for, and we definitely didn't have any of those at our house, let alone would I be allowed to stay up late enough for them. So naturally, as I think any guy my age would do, I kept my eye out for it. The day it was supposed to air on TV, I watched the TV Guide channel for about 10 solid minutes. You can tell how curious I was just from that. That's awkward. Back in those days, you couldn't just instantly pull up what you were watching and what followed for the next couple hours. You had to watch each channel slowly, scroll by, and wait for it to get to the channel you were looking for. From there, you only had a few seconds to see what was currently on and what was coming in the next hour and a half. The moment I was waiting for finally came, and the TV Guide channel let me know what numbers I needed to push on the remote to get to the show I had been waiting on for so long. Before I continue, I'd like to clarify that there were many things I did not consider before moving forward with this decision. First, it was like 8 p.m. on a Friday evening, so not only were both of my parents and my grandmother awake, but both my sisters had a friend from school come over for the night. Wait, there's more. My bedroom didn't have cable, so I was in my older sister's room watching television with the door wide open and the lights on. And this TV screen was angled towards the door. Not smart, literally right from the beginning. But what could possibly go wrong, am I right? I punched the corresponding buttons and waited to see what all the fuss was about amongst my friends that week. Sure enough, it was just a bunch of girls, wearing nothing but tiny swimsuits, just walking back and forth across the screen. I certainly didn't see anything wrong with any of it. Thinking back to it, I probably watched 5 to 10 minutes of what didn't seem like much if you think about it. Nowadays, girls who wear anything but a bikini are in the minority group. It's quote-unquote normal, I guess you could say, to dress in as little as possible and just barely cover yourself. All I heard next was, "Anthony, what are you watching?" My head snapped sideways faster than it ever has for anything else in my life before, just to see my mom standing in the doorway looking at me and then to the TV and then back towards me. She was waiting for me to explain something that obviously didn't need any explanation. Looking back, she wanted to make sure I knew and wanted to hear myself say it. I said, a Hooters thing? Dude, first of all, a Hooters thing? That's literally all I could come up with. Aside from the initial lesson to be learned from this little flashback of mine, I cringe every time I remember how weak and feeble my response was. Not to mention how utterly clueless and naive I was. My mom instantly went to town on me. She told me to turn it off immediately. She then proceeded to hit me with a barrage of questions about if I really thought watching something like that was okay, if that's all women were worth, and even how I would feel if that was my daughter up on stage and creepy guys were just watching her walk around like that. I barely managed a shaky no when she finally finished. I had never been so embarrassed in my entire life. I know for a fact that before I started bawling, my ears were white hot and my entire face was bright red. Then the waterworks came. My mom did not, for 1 second, feel the least bit sorry for me. She let me hear it for a long time. She made me pray to Jesus and ask for forgiveness on the spot in front of everyone. Not necessarily on purpose, but by that point, everyone had come to see what in the world was going on to have my mom so upset like that. Understandably, of course, my mom certainly hadn't made any effort to use her inside voice at all because she was fuming. I have not seen a single Hooters swimsuit show since that night. I actively choose to avoid it, and if anyone ever asks, I tell them exactly why. That image and that feeling are permanently etched into my subconscious mind. Never again do I want to even come close to that feeling like that. Not to mention, do I want to have to explain myself to whoever would be in my vicinity now that I'm so much older. So what's the lesson here? Well, there's a few, actually. First, don't be so sure you won't get caught. I was like 12 or 13 years old and didn't think to cover any of my corners. Definitely not smart whatsoever. I'm kidding, mostly. More importantly, and all jokes aside, the lesson here is to take inventory of how you and as we as a society often objectify women. Women are way underappreciated and often treated like pieces of meat that we only reach for when we need them. For whatever selfish reason we as men seem to deem okay in our book. I'm definitely against any form of governmental or societal censorship, but that's a book we certainly need to burn and rewrite it appropriately. As I mentioned earlier, this may seem like just a silly story from my childhood, or maybe even an overreaction from my mother. The more I look back on instances like these, the more I realize that most of the key lessons I learned when I was younger that make me the person I am today, with the thought processes I have, come from moments like these, seemingly insignificant, somewhat overexertions of disapproval and disappointment. But I would also argue that lessons like those usually stick with us much, much longer. To clarify, yes, I've been to Hooters in real life. Their fried pickles are delicious. And having 50 plus options for something to watch on television is definitely super cool. It's almost overwhelming. Yes, I can appropriately appreciate an attractive female without attempting to degrade her in any way. No, I don't look down on her because of where she works, and how any individual chooses to earn a paycheck isn't my place to assert judgment. I think I've been there a total of 3 times in my life. The food itself isn't really that special. If you want good wings, go to Wingstop. The environment there is a bit different for sure, but the food tastes much better. I also feel like the objectification aspect is surrounded by a gray area these days. For instance, to be completely straight up and honest, sex sells. There really isn't any other way to put it. If you want your product, whatever it is, to sell well, do what pretty much everyone else is doing. With that being said, to an extent, we as a society just straight up encourage it and allow it to happen. There are inconsistencies in this so-called normal way of life, though, which I believe is where all the confusion and the problems start. First off, we as men need to realize that women do not owe us anything. They are not any less of a human than we claim to be, simply because we're supposedly natural-born leaders. And they just need to sit down, be quiet, and be quote-unquote submissive. I hate that word so much. Being submissive is technically a biblical way of thinking. It's real old school, whether you're a believer or not. Ephesians chapter 5 essentially states that wives are to submit to your husbands and obey. That is verse 22. Mind you, let's just pretend that the other 21 verses before and 11 verses after it ceased to exist. That makes everything pretty straightforward and to the point, am I right? So taken completely out of context, I understand it. Wives just sit there, be quiet, and don't even think about being worth anything more than a childbearing, child-rearing dishwasher who cooks a mean pot of stew with grilled cheese on the side. No opinions from you either. What could you possibly know based on what knowledge acquired from what kind of reputable resource? Other women? Not a chance. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Some of the smartest, most capable, strong, dangerous, and inspiring people in my life are women. Oftentimes, though, women who could be every bit of those above adjectives and more are shut out and silenced based on this small-minded thinking from males riddled inside and out with insecurity. The rest of Ephesians clarifies that wives submit to their husbands as the church submits itself unto Christ. Christ is the head of the church as the husband is the head of the house. It is the husband's job to submit himself unto Christ as head and leader of said house, to be of worthy leadership, considering his wife's thoughts, needs, opinions, and etc., but in the end making the final decisions based on those considerations. So basically, doing his best to try to become someone even remotely worth submitting to. Many men take this verse out of context and demand their wives do as they say or else. It absolutely infuriates me when I hear stories like that or see people stuck in those types of relationships. That's not how it works. That's not how it has ever worked, and I'm willing to bet on my life on it that Jesus never meant for it to be like that in the first place anyways. We need to be honest with ourselves, drink a tall glass of ice-cold humility, and seriously figure some things out. God gave Adam a helper when he made Eve, not some sort of slave or minion who would cower and obey at any sign of threat from him. Now, I will admit, not all men are always in a place to be a quality leader, whether that be mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically. None of us are perfect. We all have our weaknesses, and we all fall short somewhere. Nevertheless, it is our job to be the absolute best version of ourselves we can be, constantly praying and working on it each day. I, for one, have come face to face with my glaring insufficiencies on more than one occasion. It's uncomfortable, and it never gets any easier, but it is of dire importance and necessity that we do. Without truly good, strong, determined, educated, godly men, the world will continue to spiral out of control and further into the depths of impurity and, quite frankly, stupidity. Dang, that was fiery. I don't remember writing it so in your face like that. So sorry about that, guys. I mean, not that I disagree with it at this point. It's just very in your face, but that also does very much so sound like myself. I'm usually the problem starter, not just to start problems, but if I don't see things as they should be, which also comes off kind of arrogant, but I feel like I have a decent grasp on what things should be and how things should go, treat everyone as your equal, that kind of thing. If I see things aren't going that way, or if there are things that don't sit well with me, if I don't mention it, if I don't bring it up, if I don't make everyone uncomfortable, then that's just me not being true to myself. And obviously, the title would render itself completely worthless. So take everything that I usually say with a grain of salt, but also just make sure that I do mean it with good intentions. From a guide to any female listening, guys are terrible. I get it. But also you have to realize that we are imperfect. So just be patient, but also don't be afraid to just tell them how it is. Because often they are not raised with, I don't know, the best upbringing, I guess would be the right way to say it. I'm blessed to have both parents in my house at all times, and obviously both my mom and my dad are great examples. We're all imperfect humans, whether we're parents or not. And growing up, you usually assume, bro, there's this fly that's just chasing me. Usually you assume your parents are like these perfect humans and never make any mistakes. They always have all the answers. But the older you get, you realize that that's not true, and they're just doing the best that they can. So you do have to take into consideration someone's upbringing, what they had access to in terms of information, as well as things they didn't have access to, like, whether it's a split parent household, maybe you don't even have both parents around. We all tend to choose people to look up to based off of what's available to us, not necessarily things we assume to be right. Again, guys, we're terrible, so get better. We're all imperfect, so just, I don't know, try to be patient with each other. I feel like I'm rambling, but I mean, I guess that's kind of the point of the end of the chapter, right? How to be a man. That's what my notes say currently. How to be a man appropriately would be things like take care of yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally. Don't be afraid to cry. I'll probably be one of the only guys to tell you that, but it's okay to cry, but don't be a whiny little baby. There's a line for sure. Emotions are okay, but being overly emotional is not okay. I would say that goes for anyone, not just guys, but obviously I can only speak from a male perspective. Obviously, take care of yourself. Go to the gym. Doesn't matter what kind of training you do. As many jokes as I make about CrossFit, that's hard. That's hard stuff right there. So make sure you exercise, get your heart rate up, break a sweat, eat healthy foods. As much as I love Chick-fil-A to death, eating that 6 days a week is so not good for you. So just take care of yourself, and then also educate yourself on a regular basis, whether that be reading books like mine, or basically just any other ones. Like you can contact me any way, shape, or form, whether it be like DMs, phone number, whatever. I got a list of books I can give to anyone based off of pretty much any subject. So you just reach out to me, let me know. But it is 100% your responsibility to make sure that you're taking care of you, because it is no one else's responsibility, and the fact that you may not be reaching your full potential is 100% your fault and no one else's. Just make sure you're aware of that, but also don't sit in your insufficiencies or your insecurities for too long. Obviously, realize it, think about it, process it, and then you just got to get moving, man. Without all of that rambling continuing any further, that was chapter 3, Forbidden Owl. Get it? Because Hooters. Chapter 4. Again, it is a little toasty in this warehouse. Super grateful to be here and have the opportunity to use all the equipment and stuff. But as both Alfonso and Sean will tell you, it's a little toasty in here because it is still summer. Back to reading now that I'm not so like dripping in sweat and whatnot. And hopefully that fly from chapter 3 disappeared. Chapter 4. This one is called Make the World Smaller. Anxiety and depression are hot topics these days because of the weight they hold. Some people abuse the terminology and the actual problems behind it. However, most people who truly and genuinely suffer from it don't like to quote-unquote flaunt it around on social media with the attitude of, hey, look at me, poor me, help me. By the way, that's one of my least favorite things ever. I've learned that people will show you exactly who they really are if you just give them a chance to do so. People sure do a lot of talking these days without a whole lot of backing it up, or they do the exact opposite of what they say. It's all because they care what other people think of them. Not that saying that not caring about what people think of you is insanely cool or anything. I believe there is a grayish middle area we should shoot for within the people we are close to and whose opinions we value. Opposite the group of strangers we barely know, usually the keyboard warrior on social media who just say things filtered through their own insecurities. Dr. Seuss has a quote that says, "Those who mind don't matter. Those who matter won't mind." It's a little goofy, but you get the idea. So flexing that you have any form of combination of anxiety and or depression has not ever been, and will never be cool. Also, the Dr. Seuss quote I may have mentioned already. That is where the title of my book came from. So without further ado, let's continue. Sorry. For those of you who do things like this, do yourself along with the rest of us a favor and please just stop. For those looking for someone to adequately express your feelings, problems, etc., to bear with me. I'm going to try and do my absolute best. This isn't something I've personally struggled with, but it's been under the same roof at home, so I promise I'm not just making up a bunch of nonsense to sound like I know what I'm talking about. Anxiety is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Some of you experienced anxiety as a kid in the fleeting moments of restlessness before you finally fell asleep before your first day of school at a new school. Some of you have dealt with its crippling effects on a more daily basis or maybe still do. For the last little bit of you I haven't mentioned yet, you may have never truly experienced it at all. This doesn't make you special or better than anyone who has, nor does it mean that people who do or have experienced it are broken or quote-unquote less than. It is far more complicated than that, and I am by no means smart enough or educated enough to elaborate at the moment. You simply just don't know what someone else is going through. That being said, I have seen it firsthand, as I mentioned above. It's a very real thing, and it tried to physically, mentally, and emotionally tear down one of the people closest to me. Let me tell you, I have never felt more useless in my entire life than I did those moments, which means I wouldn't even begin to understand where my friend was in his head at the exact moment. Being the person that I am, coupled to the person it was, I did everything I could think of to try and be the slightest bit of help. I read books, I Googled stuff, I did my best to talk to my friend and see if it could even be explained at all. That proved to be rather difficult for two reasons. One, it was just hard for him to talk about in the first place while still actively going through it. And two, I simply couldn't grasp the severity of it and wrap my head around it. I honestly tried, but until you experience something yourself, you just don't fully understand. Even with something else serious like losing a loved one, going through a tough breakup, etc., you can try to help with all the best of intentions, but until you personally experience it yourself, you would never truly comprehend it. There isn't anything you can do about it either. That's just how it is. After the heaviest months of it all, and everything was more or less quote-unquote over, I asked him more about it. I first told him to make sure he was comfortable with the conversation before trying to have it. But after I was certain, he elaborated a bit. He said the biggest thing that helped was simply me being present. I didn't make him feel like he was making it up. I never minimized his problems or how he said he was feeling. And most importantly, I never left. I stayed right there in the middle of it through all of it. This part struck me in particular because even though the entire time I felt like I was completely worthless, apparently I was doing something right. Sometimes that's all you can do. I was willing to do anything, of course, but the easiest option was the most impactful one, to just be there. I never tried to push him to just get over it or to quit overreacting. I've heard an unfortunate number of stories where people have been mid-struggle and have been waved off or told to just relax and get over it. Most people are, like I said earlier, all talk. They're selfish and don't want to put in any effort towards someone else, but then expect that same person to just be there for them when they need it. That's not how it works. You absolutely cannot harvest fruit where you did not first plant and tend seeds. Myself personally, I'll admit I can sometimes actually overstretch myself. Overstretch in terms of trying to quote-unquote save everyone. To use the garden illustration again, I plant too many seeds and then proceed to miss half the harvest because I can't handle the workload of it all. I've hurt some people because of that. I've had to learn where to set boundaries for my own good as well as the people that I care about. You must also learn yours. It is of dire importance for you and those closest to you. If and when you get good at it, it'll carry over for you too. Most importantly, I just urge you to try. Effort goes a long way in the relationships in your life. Aside from that instance, I had another close friend of mine ask me how to deal with anxiety and uncertainty, how I deal with mine, and or what helps me get through it. And I was a little surprised that he asked me because I've never really gone through something like that myself. I'm by no means saying anything like, hey, look at me, I'm perfect. I'm certainly not. I'm far from it, but I did the best I could to explain how I felt and what my thought process would be if it were me in that position. I first thought of sending over a sermon I've watched or listened to about 100 times over. A particular pastor I had listened to frequently was at Elevation Church, talking about peace and where to find it. Initially, it was a perfect solution and suggestion. I then immediately felt like that was a cop-out answer. Just give him stuff to watch and read, and then that's it. Then it's out of your hands, crisis averted. The easy way out. And that's not me. I strive to be the person who is willing to help in any way I can, and it doesn't matter what it is. As I mentioned above, it's just about effort. I will copy and paste what I said to him for you guys to read. I simply approached the situation how I would do anything, carefully, but as thoroughly as I could. Anxiety is not an easy topic, nor is it something to make light of. That happens often these days, and it is exactly why no one ever feels comfortable or confident enough to talk to anyone about it. This is what I sent to my friend. Honestly, man, there is no certain or absolute answer to that. Like everyone may struggle with the same thing, but it'll still technically feel differently for everyone. The biggest thing that I do is that I focus on making sure I can control what I can control. It sounds kind of goofy and possibly even too good to be true, but the small things like cooking meals, doing laundry, not missing a workout, cleaning my room, the dishes, etc., those are up to me no matter what happens. So I always make sure to do those things. When it comes to my devotional time, reading my Bible, and my prayer time, I take that pretty seriously. Like that is 1000% the only time I feel absolutely okay. At no other time throughout the day do I feel the same. It's weird to say, but it's just how it is. Alone time with the Lord is what keeps us Christians grounded and living for Him and not for the world. So I make sure to never miss that on a daily basis. Reading our Bibles is incredibly important because that's God's word written down on paper for us. That's how He speaks to us. It may not be an audible voice like we would want, but it is His voice. We must do our part to listen. A particular song lyric I remind myself of is, "Don't tell me God is silent when your Bible is closed." Things like that call you out, but they're meant for good. Another thing that I do is kind of weird to some people. I literally sit in my car when I get to work and when I get home. No music, air conditioning on low, and it's completely quiet. And for like 5 to 10 minutes, I just breathe. In through my nose, real deep, out through my mouth slowly, 4 or 5 times. And then I try to thank God for the positives in my life. It's more difficult on some days than others, but I have a car, a job, a bed of my own to lay in, things like that, just to start small and go from there. Nothing crazy. What you look for, what you think about, etc., you will find. So pay attention to where you go during this time. I do my best to stay consistent with those things, and if I begin to miss certain things or fall off track, that's usually when I start to feel the most anxious and the most frantic. After reading over my response to my friend, I have a couple things to add. First of all, anxiety is very real. If anyone ever tries to tell you otherwise, don't give any weight to their words. You are not crazy, nor are you just making things up. It is very, very real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Secondly, therapy and or getting a therapist does not make you weird. It does not mean there is something wrong with you, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with admitting that you need help. That's the first step. More than a few of my friends who struggle have gone to see a therapist, including the instance I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter. If you ever ask him about it, one of the first things he will tell you is that therapy is one of the best things he has ever done for himself. So take it from me, but also my close friend who has been through it. Seek help and assistance. Lastly, I know that not everyone who will read this is under the same beliefs or belief system as I am. I understand that and won't judge you or think any less of you for it. I simply can only speak from my point of view and how I handle things. Some of my quote-unquote tips may or may not be something you want to even bother with, but at least half of it, the control what you can control half, and maybe the quiet time in your car or a quiet private place is most certainly for everyone. That I'm sure of, so I urge you to at least try that part. For those of you who would prefer less Bible thumping thrown into the mix, I do have another option I've used more recently to help another close friend of mine. It was rather unintentional, to be honest, but it ended up being the perfect solution to calm her down. I'm normally a bit of a night owl and always have been. No matter what I have to do the next morning, I am somehow incapable of convincing myself to go to bed early. It's still true to this day. I can't fix it. This particular evening worked out to be the perfect scenario. I received a text from my friend that she was not feeling well mentally and did not feel comfortable being alone. There was a bit of unfortunate history working against my friend, so I perked up and responded immediately asking what was going on exactly. First tip for the person on the receiving end, don't freak out. One of you has to be level-headed, calm, and collected. And since they've already claimed to be the opposite, that position has to be yours. So stay calm. She explained how there was just too much going on all at once, and she felt like she had absolutely no control over anything in her life. I immediately knew what to say next. Whether you've truly struggled with anxiety of any level, all of us have felt that way at least once. I told her to stop looking so far ahead and think of the things that were in her control no matter how hard anyone tried to take it away from her. The most obvious one is stop everything and to just breathe. In through your nose real deep, hold your breath for 1 to 2 seconds, and then exhale out your mouth slowly. Boom, look at you, breathing all on your own and whatnot. The next step was honestly something random that I came up with on the spot to make her laugh. I told her to very carefully take her index finger and slowly but firmly stick it up one of her nostrils. In the immediately following text, before she could respond, I said again, boom, you just picked your nose all on your own with no one's help or permission. As most people would, she sent back the sick-faced emoji and then a puking emoji following by some laughing ones. Mission accomplished. The biggest thing is she had to start small. As I was typing out the words, "You have to make the world smaller," I had a flashback to a short clip from the Superman movie starring Henry Cavill, Man of Steel. Also, free my man Henry Cavill, because WB is garbage and they ruined an entire superhero series. So, anyways, back to it. Reason being, that's exactly where I got the quote from, literally word for word. I obviously can't link the video here, but if you're above the age of 5, I imagine you know how to use YouTube. Basic rundown of the clip is young Clark Kent in something like 4th grade, and he has all of his superpowers suddenly thrust upon him. His super hearing, x-ray vision, heat vision, etc. all burst into the forefront of his awareness, and he proceeds to leave the classroom to find a utility closet that is dark, quiet, and away from everyone. Whilst trying to coerce him out of the closet, someone phoned his mother, Martha. She shows up and immediately runs to kneel by the closet door. She pleads for him to come out, but Clark says, "I can't. The world is too big, Mom." Without raising her voice or showing any change in emotion, she softly responds with, "Then make it smaller. Focus on one thing at a time, and focus on my voice only." And as you might expect, it worked. His powers fell back into the subconscious awareness, and he can see and hear normally again. I asked my friend if she had seen that movie at all, and she said she had not. So I found the roughly 2-minute clip on YouTube and sent it over. Worked like a charm. She'd calmed down quite a bit and said she felt like she could at least get some sleep now. She thanked me for having the right thing to say at the perfect time and mentioned she didn't know how I managed it. I told her I had absolutely no idea either, since I hadn't seen the movie in years, but it didn't matter because she got the job done. She was finally able to get some sleep, and we talked it over a bit more the next day. If you truly deal with anxiety on a regular basis, there is no definite answer or solution to your problem. I am no expert, nor am I even close to one. I truly believe that everyone is different, and there is no blanket solution, pill, or anything. There are certainly options to help you get started in the right direction. The biggest thing I suggest you do first is admit that you struggle and that you need help. A person who is willing to admit that they need help tells me a lot about that individual. They deserve the utmost amount of respect, and then from there, simply reach out. Maybe not everyone around you can be your personal therapist, so don't just assume that kind of responsibility on your friends and family. But I promise you, there is someone out there who can help you. All you need is the courage to look. The help is there. You are not alone. Dang, that was heavy in the opposite direction. Like ended the chapter 3 with like fire and brimstone, I guess you would say, terminology wise, and then I was just like real sad the next one. Yeah, so sorry guys. Sorry that's not as entertaining as it normally would be, but no, anxiety is a very heavy subject. Anxiety, depression, just overall mental health in general is a very, very heavy topic. And then again, just like I said in the chapter, I don't think I've ever truly dealt with it on a consistent basis. You know, we've all been through some hurt where you kind of are down in the dumps for a couple weeks, couple months, but usually you come out of it. Whereas some people on a daily basis struggle with it. So that's a completely different story. That's not even close to the same thing. And I certainly don't wish that kind of pain on anyone. But you also just have to realize, like, it's pretty normal, unfortunately. With the way the world is nowadays, it's not something that you should take for granted, I guess, if you don't deal with it on a regular basis. And then people who deal with it on a regular basis need to know that that doesn't make them any less important, any less, like, human, any less of a just person in general. We all struggle with things. We all have things that we're not good at or things that really weigh us down on a regular basis. Some people are better at hiding it. Some people deal with different stuff. Some people can keep it behind closed doors, whereas some of those struggles aren't as easily hidden behind closed doors. But I mean, it really just kind of depends on the individual and who they surround themselves with. Because if you're surrounded by negativity or anything that like triggers all of those issues on a regular basis, obviously you can't heal in the environment that hurts you, or at least you can't heal when the environment continues to at least open the wound. That's also a tricky situation because, like, if it's, you know, you struggle with anxiety and depression and your parents or your home life or whatever continue to tell you that you're faking it or tell you that you're a crazy person or whatever, obviously it's really hard depending on what age you were, what age you are, and you know, like financial situation. Obviously it's really hard to just be like, all right, I'm gonna leave, because obviously if you can't afford to move out, then you're gonna be homeless within a week. But the biggest thing is do your absolute best to minimize those kinds of interactions. So if it is something like, you know, your home life, your parents or whatever who continue to make you seem like a crazy person, do your absolute best to only hide it around them, or only, I don't know, avoid bringing it to the forefront of conversation around them. And then outside of your house, whether it be at work, whether it be at the gym, or with a close-knit group of friends, make sure that you are also mindful of bringing it out to the forefront in the right environment so you can work through it and get through it. Because if you just let it sit there and boil, and eventually it'll obviously become an issue, but it'll never go away. Obviously, some of that stuff never truly goes away, but if you don't actively try to get rid of it, then it for sure is not only not going to go away, but it's going to get worse. Just make sure that you're mindful of it. I do have some notes. I don't really know where I was going with this. So the garden illustration that I mentioned, don't expect to harvest something you didn't plant. So obviously, if you don't do the work to be a good friend when people need a good friend, you can't expect other people to be a good friend to you. We all have our own problems to deal with, and we all our own responsibilities. Obviously, everybody's going through hard times right now. So depending on the type of friends you keep, you really need to be mindful of your own struggles and be at least aware enough to communicate those to the people actually close enough to you to care. And if they don't care, that's a good sign that you really need to find new friends, which isn't necessarily always an easy situation. Because if you've been best friends with somebody or a group of people for 10 years, you grew up with them or whatever, it's really hard to be like, hey, you guys aren't good for my mental health, so I'm just going to leave and go find new friends, because it's not how it works. But also people are very very emotional, and they'll definitely take that personally. So that's definitely another talking point, or I could even ramble on that for hours. Again, just know the type of people around you and know the type of person you are. And if you don't feel like you would be comfortable coming to the type of friend that you are, that means you have work to do. Also be aware, don't dump it on your friends, even if they are going to stay around and listen to you. If you continuously dump it on them and you don't ever ask them how they're doing, you don't ever ask them hey, are you even prepared to handle all of this dumping I'm about to do? If you don't ever do that, then they're probably going to remove themselves from the situation anyways. So just be mindful of that. But always make sure that there's somebody out there who would listen to you. Listen to your story, listen to what you need to talk about versus going any other routes. Find somebody. You can access me, whether it be Instagram, email, phone number, whatever, and I'll do my absolute best. Obviously, there's only so much I can handle, but I'm not just gonna be please leave me alone. So find your people, keep them close, and make sure that you are planting and tending as much as you're planning on harvesting as well. Hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, again, thank you for Sean and using the warehouse, Pride Foods HQ. Super awesome. I just get to speak into a microphone that I barely know how to use. So shout out to my guy, Sean. Buy all the rice and grinds and Rice Krispies you can, because they're delicious. And then shout out to Lauren for sitting here and watching me ramble and obviously putting all this together. Shout out to my guy, Alfonso. I'm sure he's cool with this, but he's the guy I'm talking about in the first part of the chapter. He still goes with it, goes through some stuff on a regular basis, but he also continues to go to a therapist, and obviously I'm always there for when he needs to talk. So make sure that you do have those people. I wrote this chapter almost 2 years ago, and the fact that he's still mindful of where his weaknesses are and making sure that he doesn't set himself up for failure. He's really good about that. So yeah, shout out to my guy Alfonso. If you want to read along with me, my book is available on my website or on Amazon. My website is just my first and last name, Anthony Hust, ANTHONYHUST.org. And then I will obviously sign it personally, send you a thank you note to go with it, versus, Amazon will just print it, send you the book, and that's it. But if you want to read along with me, I would be very, very grateful. Tell all your friends. And I'm working on some new shirt designs, new hoodies, all that kind of stuff. Not much of a apparel person, but I am currently writing the next book. So funding that will be the next project. So I need to get that monetary situation set up and the funnel starting to go from somewhere. I will keep you guys posted, but eventually those will also be available on my website. So without further ado, have a wonderful day and do something nice for someone else.